Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day, and sent them out into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing about 5 in the afternoon. He went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. So he said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with those hired last and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those who had come to be hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they'd received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "Those who were hired last worked only an hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day?" But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my money? Or are you envious because I'm generous?" So, the last will be first, and the first will be last. This is the word of the Lord. So, Jesus, when talking about the kingdom of heaven, he often talked in parables. He would describe the kingdom not directly, not with 3 points of the kingdom, but with stories and parables. He would enter us into a world and inhabit that world and say that is what it is like to be in the kingdom. And the purpose of this is because Jesus wants to expand our imagination. He wants us to show us through these stories and through our reaction to these stories that the kingdom runs on different principles that are counterintuitive to us. That if we rely on our own intuition, if we rely on making sense of it on our own, if we're born into the world with an intuitive understanding of the nature of the kingdom of heaven, we wouldn't need these stories, and we might not even need Jesus. But if the kingdom is so different, so other, that our intuition will only get us into trouble, which I think is a big part of this sermon, or this parable, then we need to come to the parable and say to ourselves, I might not understand even the first thing about the kingdom of heaven. That if I rely on my own intuition, I'm going to be the disgruntled laborer in the story. So I want to inhabit this story. I want to learn from this story. I want to open myself up to the sense of what I am or am not owed, and let this story, this parable, wash over me. So here's how the story goes. The story begins with a landowner who needs workers. And so we could assume, safely infer from this story that it's harvest time. So he runs a vineyard, so he's got his staff that's there, maybe lives on the property, works the land all through the year. And then at certain parts of the season, he needs extra hands for harvest. It's too much work for his crew. So he goes and hires what we would call day laborers, people who would work for the day, people who would go to a place that in the hopes of finding work for the day and then being hired on for that. And so he goes out early, lighted on, very, very early. Who would you find very early in the morning at a place where day laborers would come to gather? You'd presumably find those who were the most desperate for work, those who wanted to be at the front of the line, those who understood that there's a hierarchy here, and the earlier show up, the more likely you are to work for the day. I got to provide for my family. So at the beginning of the story, we have those who are industrious, those who have a good, strong Protestant work ethic, even though Protestants were 1,500 years away from entering into the scene. But they have that work ethic. Like, they're industrious. They're going to go. And so what you have at the beginning is a very concrete arrangement. It's explicit. You work all day, and I will pay you a denarius. And they agree to those terms. So it begins with concrete terms with a specified amount at the end of the day. And its amount, a denarius, is what would have been considered a day's wages. If you were to go to any of those people working there and say, what do you hope to get today? A denarius. What is your base? What's the least you would take for a day? A denarius. It was neither generous nor stingy. It was just the standard accepted rate. This is what would be needed for a day's work. It's a fair day's wages. And this landowner is in saying that I'll pay at the end of the day is consistent with Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 24. Leviticus 19:13 says, "Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight." And so in paying them for the day, what God in his law is saying, people who are hungry, people who are living hand to mouth, pay them their wages at the end of the day. Don't say, "I'll get you tomorrow. I'll take care of it tomorrow. I'm short today. Oh, I'm so sorry." And then use that as a way to get them to come back and then potentially set them up, because that's the first half of the verse says, "Do not defraud or rob your neighbor." And so here's a system of taking care of those who are working all day long to have a pay that's fair and a pay that is timely. So they go and they do that. Then the day goes on. He goes back. Maybe he evaluates, I got more work here than I thought. So he goes back and he finds some more people there. Now it's 9 a.m. This is the first part of the day where people are starting to get anxious. I may not get hired today. And he comes and says, "What are you doing here?" "Well, nobody's hired us." "Well, I hire you." And then the details of what is going to be paid start to get a little bit vague. "I will pay you what is fair." And then every couple hours, he goes back, pulls more workers, back, pulls more workers. This is somebody who is going back and forth to get more people to work, to train them, to tell them what they're going to be doing that day, delegate, send them out to the fields, and then going back to get more, even all the way until 5 p.m. Working folks, what happens at 5 p.m. on a work day? I mean, I tell you, my productivity, which is low, traffic is at 5 p.m. The commute home is at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. is the end of the workday. And so he's going there, and here are the people that thought either one of two things. One, they worked somewhere else, and they thought, I'm just going to go back and see if there's just something at the end of the day. Because sometimes maybe you could go and work for an hour, and then obviously you wouldn't get paid a full day's wages, you wouldn't get denarius, but maybe you'd get, in this case, a bushel of grapes. I have no idea what a bushel is, or even if a person can carry it. A reasonable amount of grapes at the end of the day. It would be, and this is more of a bartering society, you're not going to break a denarius in half, so maybe I'll get something. But you notice that as the day moves on, the work gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and the details about what payment to receive go from vague, you'll be paid what's fair, to no promise whatsoever. Just come and work. No, there's no promise at all. And then, at the end of the day, the horn sounds. I said next door, it's yabba dabba do time. Okay, good, I see some nods. I wasn't sure how many Flintstone watchers there were here. Slide down the old brontosaurus neck. And so he lines them up. And so those who worked all day stand here. Those who came out at 9, 11, 1, 3, and then 5. Those who barely broke a sweat. And so he comes to the 5 o'clock person and says, "Here's your denarius," which is absurd. There's often in Jesus' parables an absurdity to it, a sense of, well, nobody would do that. That's where you start to feel the edge of what Jesus is trying to say to us, is nobody would pay a full day's wages for somebody that worked an hour. You can't run a business that way. And so you have the break it down people standing there seeing that and being like, oh, did you see that? He got a denarius. No way. Are you sure it wasn't a silver coin? No, it was a denarius. It was definitely a denarius. So you can see this brouhaha beginning to emerge of this back and forth talk. And I know you guys, okay? When you get a little bit of extra cash, I'm looking for the person sitting behind Zachary in particular. When you get a little particular kind of cash in your hand, your first thought, and I'm guilty of this too, I'm calling people out individually, I'm as guilty of this too. When you get sense of a little bit extra money, what is the first thing you begin to do with it? Yeah, you start to think about the ways you can spend it. And then, maybe and I'll be generous too at the end of it, but they start thinking, I can get that new cloak. Maybe that's enough. If it's 1 denarius, 3 denarius, 5 denarius, 7 denarius, 9 denarius, then I could maybe get goat, some chickens, to brew some eggs. They start spending the money. So their expectations go from 1 denarius to more. And just notice in there, watching what somebody else received begins to change their expectations and what they hope to get. They may think things like, I know he said we're going to get 1 denarius. But nobody in their right mind would pay somebody the same. So maybe it's just 3 to 5. That I'll take whatever extra we can get. This is my family's going to be so happy with this extra windfall. And then as he goes down and he pays the wages to the 5 o'clock people, to the 3 o'clock people, to the 1 o'clock people, to the 11 o'clock people, to the 9 o'clock people, 1 denarius, 1 denarius, 1 denarius, 1 denarius. And then those expectations that were here dropped all the way down to exactly what was already promised to them. And they are grumbling, they're incensed, they're angry, they feel they're not being treated fairly. One of the great joys of parenting is the number of times you hear the words, that's not fair. Kids have this ingrained sense of fairness. And if you think about that, it's an ingrained sense of fairness, but where's it biased towards? And I think adults are basically grown-up children, that we have in this sense, this ingrained sense of what is fair and what is unfair. And we may think something is fair until somebody else gets more. Something changes there. And what you have is a story that begins to play with our sense of fairness and unfairness. So let me just ask you, in the privacy of your own mind, which one of the workers would you rather be? All paid the same. Are you a break-it-on person? That Protestant work ethic, I got to earn I don't want a handout. Are you a 9 o'clock person where you're like, I don't want a handout, but I'd like to sleep in a little bit. And if it's all the same, it's still a full day's work, it's still relatively fair. It is literally a 9 to 5. Or would you go all the way down to be like, man, I would be the last one there. I would be just showing up and just jogging behind the group that just got there and acting as if you got called there. And I would be envious too. It would be weird to work so much more and to get paid exactly the same as somebody that did much less. I think that natural sense of, yeah, but that isn't fair. That isn't, in some sense, maybe even right to pay people in that way. If you knew everybody's getting paid the same, then it would seem to be, then show up late. At the end of the game, come to the very end, you get paid the same. And you might forget, perhaps, that waiting to be hired includes a lot of anxiety and stress. Am I going to be able to feed my family today? It would include perhaps disappointment, being passed over by other people looking for workers, thinking, why didn't I get picked today? That was a good gig. I would have skill there. But you forget that part of the waiting is a sense of feeling lost and a sense of feeling I might not be able to provide for my family today. So, what is the point of this parable? And I'm being serious. Does anybody know? Well, if you take it as a standalone parable, and without any sense of where this story falls in the larger story, the first word of the passage is for. For the kingdom of heaven is like. You could translate it as therefore, or this might be helpful for you to understand why you're so confused right now. So let's read what just happened. And as you've now inhabited the story, the strangeness of it, the way that it's disorienting, confusing, listen, now that you know the parable, to what just happened, and then let's see if we can figure out maybe what Jesus is trying to do here. So I'm going to start in Matthew chapter 19. I'm going to start in verse 16. Just then, a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" So the beginning of the story, the context here, is someone asking about work and wages. What do I do to inherit? So he has a very capitalistic system. I do this work, I get this in return. So he's has kind of a transactional relationship here, which Jesus is going to flag. "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "Well, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, honor your father and mother, and," adding to that, "love your neighbor as yourself." Real quick, where do you get those commandments? Kind of tips my hand there a little bit. Where do you get those commands? Yeah. So which are the ones he omitted? Yeah, so there's the first three are love the Lord your God, or honor to the love of God, to have no graven images, and to not use his name falsely, and Krista, one more time, Sabbath. Why might a rich young ruler not have been asked about the Sabbath? And then what's the very last commandment of the 10? Do not covet. Okay? So what he's being asked about are the concrete laws of how to treat one another, but there's nothing mentioned about rest. There's nothing mentioned in here at all about jealousy, which is where the story's going to go in the parable. And there's nothing about honoring God and serving him first. So all these I have kept, the young man said. What do I still lack? Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go sell all your possessions, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." When the rich young ruler, the young man, heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. Just inferred in being able to go away. He had great health, but yeah, he had great wealth, okay? Now, for this portion and the parable, Jesus turns to whom? The disciples. So now Jesus is talking to his disciples. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven." When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astonished and asked, "Who then can be saved?" Jesus looked at them. And just not a lot of times do we have this, Jesus looking at them and saying, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Peter answered him, "We've left everything to follow you. What then will there be for us?" So again, that moment in the parable waiting to be paid out, is the question, what will they be for us now? Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on the glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. Does that context change a little bit how we understand or read this passage? You have in there a story of a rich young ruler, somebody who is, just break down those 3 words. That's all you need to know about him. Rich, young, powerful. So in picturing this part of the passage, I just pictured Timothy Chalamet. Because I think of somebody who is rich. Chalamet! Somebody who is rich, young, and has the most important kind of power and wealth available to us right now, which is celebrity. And so if you can imagine Timothy Chalamet coming to our church, which I know some of you have already tried to imagine that, but and he comes here and he wants to be part of this church, and me, winsome peacemaker John, who preaches grace and mercy, says, Chalamet, if you want to follow Jesus, sell everything, give it to the poor, and then come back to my church. Would you be like, whoa, time out here, John. What are we doing here? Why are we doing that? Like, he could give you a shout out on social media. He could hashtag this church and see our Instagram page, which has at times 2 posts a year, and could be part of that. You would be thinking, in a culturally way, that there is an advantage to somebody like that coming to a place like this, that this movement could get a boost from it, that we would see somebody that has everything coming to us getting credibility from that. Like, the disciples are truly disoriented and confused. And when he goes away sad, they look at Jesus after he sends the crowd away. They look at Jesus and say, if the kingdom of heaven isn't for people like that, who's it for? What are we doing here? What is the purpose of following you? What do we stand to gain? I'm so disoriented right now by everything that just happened. I'm confused. I'm scared. Now I feel insecure. I've been following you for a while now, Jesus, and I don't know why you just did that. And now my whole sense of right, wrong, up, down, work, wages, everything is thrown into equilibrium. What is going on? And so Jesus goes in there, and he affirms. So he starts with, he can see their distress, and he says, basically, you're good. Don't worry about that. With man, not possible. With God, all things are possible. So stop looking at you, what you're doing, what you gave up, what you lost, what you gained, and look at God who's able to do all things. So stop the game of trying to figure out if you've done enough or are good enough to get the wages. So put that aside. And then he says to them the parable. In their confusion, which you notice that the last verse of 19 was, in the end, the first will be last and the last will be first. And he says the exact same thing at the end of his parable, saying this system and the way that your imagination of what makes a life good, rich, and beautiful has been distorted. And the way that you think about wealth, rewards, what makes a life good and beautiful, here's a man who came to you that for the 12 disciples symbolized what they aspire to. Whether they thought about it openly or directly or not, they thought, that is somebody that has it. That is, to follow God means to have those things that he has. And for him to be sent away is confusing and disorienting to them. And then he tells a parable. And in that parable, you have different levels of work, different amount of time of work, different effort in their work. And in the end, all being paid the same. And in that payment of the same, what that symbolizes, what it promises, is enough for the day. So what Jesus is saying is all these workers, all their different levels of work, what they are provided in their wages was, to put it in terms we just prayed, he gave them that day their daily bread. And that, in the end, with those who said that's not fair, they got more than I got, they got wages that exceed the work that they did, that's not fair. And what the landowner says to him is, to each one of those is like, did I not do what I promised I would do for you? Is this problem in you not because you're doing some kind of comparison game and you're comparing your work now in the light of what others did and received? And ought you not just think about the arrangement we made at the beginning and the promise I gave to you, which was a day's worth of work and a day's worth of pay? Or are you jealous of my generosity? And so, where's the jealousy? It's the old day workers. It's, the PKs that became pastors themselves. Like, it's those people that are just like, I spent my whole life doing all this, and this is what I get. It's like that kind of person. And at the end, whom are they jealous of? They're jealous of the people at the very end, at the ones who barely got paid. And they're only jealous because of their sense of entitlement. That's the word that's really stood out to me in this passage, entitlement. I'm entitled to a particular kind of life. I'm entitled to, because of my work and my labor and the heat and the suffering I endured, I'm entitled to more. And what the landowner reminds them is nothing more was promised to you. The reason you're disappointed is because of some story you told in your head about the way things ought to be. But we, in the kingdom, live in a world where the last will be the first, and the first will be the last. It is upside down. It's going to engender resentments in one and joy in another, depending on where you are in this line of workers and laborers. But our sense of fairness is the problem at the center of this story. And what we can expand this story to things like the deathbed confession versus the person who is faithful all their life receiving in their same wages. And thinking, you mean I could have had the best of both worlds? And like I said in the story, yeah, but you're missing the point of the person, the landowner, seeking those who were lost. You wanted to spend your whole life lost? You wanted to spend your whole life without meaning and purpose and work and the assurance that what's most important would be provided for you in the end? Is that what you really want? What did you think? What does that expose in you, what you think about the nature of the kingdom of heaven and the purpose of this life? Others have talked about how this parable is about Gentile inclusion. Here's God who was faithful to Israel for all these years. Israel was faithful to God. And then in the end, the Gentiles? The uncircumcised pork eaters come in now? You can see that in this parable is a big field that has multiple interpretations because it's about the kingdom of heaven, what it's like, and how our expectations and entitlements can rob and cloud our vision from seeing a God who seeks and saves who are lost. A God who goes out time after time, beyond any reasonable amount of time, looking for people who are lost, who are unable to provide the basic means for themselves, and are invited into a place where they have work and they have the promise at the end of the day of bread. And asking the confrontational question at the end, why did you think you were owed more when you got what you were promised? Is it because of jealousy and envy at my generosity? Jesus called his disciples with these words, "Come and follow, and I will make you fishers of men," or whatever you are. I will make you a better one. I will form you. I will shape you. There's images of the vineyard of abundance and joy and wine and a feast, which is what we're going to talk about next week, which is part of why this one came first. So the good news is coming. But in the end, what are you promised? What is this sense of fairness that robs you of the joy of the landowner to see, like, look, more people have come. More people have come to join the work. This vineyard now, what we've been working towards, is now possible because more and more workers are coming. And in the end, saying, all I ever want was what I need. Wanting more makes me miserable. So all I want is what I've been promised, which is my daily bread. Meaningful work and purpose under the landowner's supervision. And that in the end, the reward and the promise is Jesus himself. That is the reward. That is what we're working for. And anytime we start getting into the game of, but I've been faithful, so I'm entitled to these other comforts and pleasures and things like that, lends us up to being resentful and angry. And the invitation of this parable is to join the work of God, to not want more than we need, and to join the work that he's doing. Come, follow me, into a place where the last are first, into a place where the world of wealth and power are worth giving all away to enter into daily wages with God, so that we can be given all we need and 100 times more than we could ever ask for. So let's come to the table. Let's find our daily bread. Let's confess together as we do. This is all we need is found at the table. Let's pray. Father, as we come to the table, to the feast that awaits us there, the broken body of your Son, broken for us, the cup which represents his blood, given in forgiveness of all of our sins. May we come to the table joyful that you came and found us, that you've called us into a life that looks different than the world around us, that has different values, so we might celebrate your generosity and inclusion, just like we're invited to through this parable. Reframe, reshape our imagination of what makes a life good, and may we hunger and thirst for your kingdom to come. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.